So I wanted to make the show about small town boys around the HIV and AIDS crisis because I feel like as a gay man who grew up in the 80s, I feel like this has been something that's always been part of my um it's been in my head really from being a really young kid. So I think the first time although the AIDS crisis had been around for a while by this point, the first time that I'd really known about it was around 1980, where the AIDS Don't Die of Ignorance kind of billboards were kind of plastered everywhere. And so I would have been 11 at that point. And I remember this like so vividly. It's one of my core memories where I remember getting on the bus to go to swimming with my school. And I remember like we're waiting for the bus and this huge billboard had appeared there. And everybody was talking about it because I think there was then, a campaign on TV and people had seen it on television and things. And there was this kind of like fear about what this was because it was purposely designed to shock people into action with this advert, and suddenly people were kind of like sitting up and realizing it wasn't something that was just affecting gay men, but that actually was actually affecting everyone. So I think for me, as someone who knew I was different, and when people were in school talking about, oh, I like such and such, I was always thinking, no, but I like people. Like I like other guys. I don't like the other kind of girls that the other boys are kind of talking about at school. So I kind of suddenly kind of got this thing about feeling different, and I think it then really like lived in me for years after that about this kind of this campaign that was fairly terrifying. And when I speak to a lot of my friends about that kind of similar age, it really put the fear in us about kind of what kind of our lives were going to look like going forward, because this felt like a very managed campaign in a way to kind of strike fear into people. So Terence Higgins was the first named person who died of an AIDS-related illness in the UK, and that was 1982. And I think for me, kind of reading up about Terence Higgins and the really amazing work that the Terence Higgins Trust that was then set up in honor of him, all the work that they did in the 80s to campaign for kind of for awareness and kind of pushing for the government to actually take action at the time, who were very much kind of dragging their heels and not doing anything to look after people because they thought it was an illness that only affected gay men. That the Terence Higgins Trust did extraordinary work kind of in his honor of of kind of trying to make kind of change happen and take action. So Terence Higgins collapsed at Heaven nightclub, and when I was kind of reading a lot about that, I was kind of thinking it would be really interesting to kind of look at kind of what happened there, kind of imagining a night out where someone's in a nightclub, having like the kind of almost like the time of their lives, and then actually leading to a moment where they collapse on the dance floor. So I've kind of mirrored that in the show, that one of the characters then has that kind of similar experience where they're out with a group of friends and then kind of collapse on the dance floor, and that takes us into a whole scene about looking at kind of what happened then when these men and other people were then taken to hospitals. So I then delved into lots of kind of archive kind of photos and footage of the time, and found loads of these really moving images, lots of photographs that I kind of found of kind of people kind of with their loved ones. Some of them were just, really heartbreaking about seeing kind of people in such a fragile state, but, hugging onto teddy bears and things that there was just such innocence there that, we're actually talking about a lot of young people who early 20s who should be in the prime of their life and having an incredible time exploring who they are and making connections, but instead they now find themselves in these wards and just not being kind of looked after in the way that they should have been. And I just find all that, really like super, super moving and sad. And I sat with the dancers and we kind of looked at some of these images about trying to kind of use that to kind of almost honor kind of what happened to these people, and to kind of bring that story to kind of like people's kind of consciousness, but told in a different way that isn't told through text, but is told through movement instead. At the time, I also found lots of kind of footage and photography of some of the headlines that we find in tabloids at the time, and it's just, it makes me like really angry, like reading some of those things that were kind of written about our community. Things like one of the ones that really like stuck with me was one saying, one headline saying, "I would rather shoot my son than him contract AIDS." And it was also staged with an image of this, and it was a vicar, and he'd kind of taken his own son up this mountain with a group of photographers, took like a kind of like a rifle and held it to his son's face and posed for this picture. I mean, it just seems like ludicrous, really, that someone would do that to their own child. And it just kind of found it just really shocking, to be honest. So kind of looking at all of that, I thought I wanted to kind of make a whole section that then looks at the headlines and those horrendous kind of things that have been written. And so I've got this section called headlines that kind of is done to the song Drive by the Cars. And about, it was that kind of idea about late in a club or something, and you kind of that moment of like, or maybe the last dance or something of the night, but is this actually potentially the last dance? Not even just of the night. So I then thought it would be quite moving to take some of those kind of headlines and some of those just single words, and take some of them and then write on the dancers' bodies, so that they're kind of slowly kind of showing vulnerable bits of their body, but they would have some writing on there. So I worked with our amazing dramaturg and writer, Natalie McGrath, on kind of capturing the right kind of bits, the headlines, and the right words to take from those headlines. And they're all just kind of words that are almost like, kind of like, they almost get like kind of printed on our bodies. And, and sometimes it feels like as queer people that, our bodies are like, places of violence quite often, that, we're beat up in streets and we're mugged, and, as well as then kind of, verbal kind of abuse that is kind of like thrown at us as well. So I felt like I wanted them to almost feel like they were kind of like bruises or tattoos on your body. And so they get kind of revealed in various kind of bits and places on their body.